Have you ever been hurt by the person you loved the most? Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you gave life to and realized that somehow they were the one who hurt you the deepest? I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to feel your chest tear open, not from hate, but from love. Because when the pain comes from your own child, it doesn't scream. It goes silent. It sits there, stuck in your throat, caught between pride and forgiveness, between the urge to disappear and the need to keep loving. I learned, in the hardest possible way, that a mother's love is the kind of love that heals the most and bleeds the most too. Today, I want to share a story that isn't just mine. It's the story of many mothers, many women who gave everything and still ended up broken. If you're a mother, a daughter, or someone who has ever loved beyond measure, stay with me until the end, because this story is about faith, pain, and something that time can't erase, the power of a forgiving heart. Before we go on, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching from? What city? What state? What country? I want to know where the hearts that feel this story with me are, because believe me, this story crosses borders. It happens in big homes and small ones, in cold countries and warm ones, in families that look perfect and in those that barely speak to each other. A mother's love doesn't have an address. It's born, it grows, it gives itself completely, and sometimes it bleeds. And when it bleeds, it's not the body that hurts, it's the soul. I never imagined I'd tell this story out loud. I always thought some kinds of pain should be kept in silence, prayed about, left for God to understand. But silence can hurt too. So today, I want to break mine. I want to open my heart and tell you about the day the love of my life, the one I carried in my arms, watched take his first steps, heard say, "Mama," for the first time, raised his hand against me. No, it wasn't easy to say that out loud. For a long time, I pretended it hadn't happened. I put a smile on my face and told myself it was just a phase, that my son was lost, tired, confused. But time doesn't erase what the heart feels. And every time I looked at him, I saw both the little boy who once held my hand and the man who, without realizing it, broke it. People say a mother's love is blind. I don't believe that. A mother's love sees everything, even what no one else can see. It sees the mistake, but also the fear. It sees the aggression, but also the pain behind it. It sees the sin, but also the lost child screaming for help from a place even he doesn't understand. That's why, that day, I didn't scream. I didn't react. I just felt the sound of the slap, the weight of his hand, and then the silence. A silence so deep, it felt like the world itself had stopped. And even with my face burning, the real pain wasn't on my skin. It was in my heart, my mother's heart. Maybe you understand. Maybe you've loved someone who hurt you and still couldn't stop loving them. Maybe you've also asked yourself why God allows love to become a wound. I've asked that question thousands of times, but the answer doesn't come easy. Sometimes it comes with time, sometimes with tears, sometimes with forgiveness. And forgiveness, oh, forgiveness is the kind of prayer you whisper while your heart is bleeding, asking God to heal what love has broken. Stay with me until the end, because this story isn't about violence. It's about healing. It's not about despair. It's about faith. And above all, it's about understanding that loving doesn't mean being silent, but it also doesn't mean letting hate win. My story begins with silence, a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind only those who have cried quietly can understand. And from that silence, I'll tell you everything, because sometimes the soul only finds peace when pain is spoken out loud. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you might understand what took me a lifetime to learn, that a mother's love can be wounded, but it can never be defeated. I remember his first cry like it was happening right now. It was the middle of the night, and the whole world seemed to fit inside that small room, filled with the smell of warm milk and hope. I looked at that tiny face and thought, God trusted me with a life. I didn't know anything about being a mother, but I knew one thing. I would do anything, to make sure he never suffered. The years went by fast. I remember his little hands wrapped around my fingers, his unsteady steps down the hallway, the first time he called me Mommy. That word went through me like a promise. I swore that as long as I lived, he would never be alone. And for a long time, he wasn't. I was his shelter, his comfort, his food, his shield. There were nights when a fever wouldn't let him sleep, and I'd sit beside his bed, whispering prayers, changing compresses, begging God not to take my boy. And when he finally got better, I would cry, out of exhaustion, out of love, out of gratitude. That's when I truly understood what a mother's heart is. It's living with your chest outside your body, exposed to the world, feeling everything your child feels. He grew up, and with growing came the first choices, the first no's said in a new tone. But before that, there was still a sweet boy who would hug me tight when I came home tired from work. A boy who said that when he grew up, he wanted to take care of me, buy me a nice house, give me an easy life. And I believed him, because in his eyes, there was love. Pure, innocent, genuine love. On Sundays, we would sit together for lunch. I'd cook his favorite meal, and he'd laugh loudly. That kind of laugh that fills the whole house with joy. Sometimes he talked so much that I'd just watch, quietly, trying to memorize every gesture, every expression. I always told him, "One day, my son, you'll be a good man, a man of faith." And he'd smile and say, "I'll be just like you, Mom." That's what I believed, that the love I gave would be the foundation of everything he became, that the prayers I whispered while he slept would follow him for the rest of his life. And maybe, in some way, they still do. Because a mother's love, even when broken, remains the thread that ties a child's heart to God. But time is a teacher that speaks in silence. The sweet boy slowly turned into a restless, young man with eyes full of dreams and impatience. I saw the change, but I pretended not to. I told myself it was just a phase, that every young man pulls away a little, that he'd come back when the world tired him out. But the world is cruel to pure hearts. It turns love into pride, faith into doubt, gentleness into anger. Even so, there were still days when he was the same boy again. Sometimes he came home late, tired, lost in thought, but he still called me Mom. And that Mom was enough. Enough to make me forget the yelling, the slammed doors, the harsh words. Enough to make me cook his favorite dish again and place the fork on the right side, just the way he liked it. Because a mother's heart doesn't learn to give up, it just waits. I remember once, he must have been around 12. He fell off his bike and scraped his knee. He came running, crying, and hugged me tight. I kissed the wound, cleaned it gently, and said, "It's going to be okay, my son." And it was. Physical pain at least. Because there are other pains that no medicine or kiss can heal. And those are the ones life makes you face later. Every memory of him as a child is like a photograph inside me. The laughter in the backyard, the clothes scattered around the house, the smell of soap on his shirts, the sound of his little feet running across the floor. Sometimes I close my eyes and see it all again. Time tries to erase it, but the heart holds on to what's sacred. And you know what's strange? When you're a mother, you don't realize you're documenting an entire story of love. Every small gesture becomes a memory. Every worry becomes a prayer. Every tear becomes a seed of faith. I always believed every sacrifice was worth it, that the love I gave was strong enough to protect him from everything. But life taught me that even the purest love has to be strong enough to survive pain. My little boy grew up, and with him came the absences. The room felt emptier. The plate sometimes stayed full, and the house got quieter. I told myself it was just life running its course, that children grow up and drift away. But deep down, I felt it. Something was changing. He didn't tell me things anymore. The look that used to be sweet was now distant. The hug became quick, almost mechanical. And even so, I kept believing. I kept asking God to watch over him wherever he was, because a mother doesn't give up. A mother prays. A mother waits. A mother forgives before she's even asked. Today, looking back, I understand. Every smile of his was a promise, and every silence a warning. But at the time, I just wanted to keep my hope alive. I told myself that if a mother's love can move mountains, it could also heal what I couldn't understand. And maybe you, listening to me now, feel it too. That fear of losing someone you love, that urge to hold time in your hands. I know it. I tried too. And that's when love began to change. Write in the comments if you also miss the days when your son was still your little boy, when the house was full of laughter and love was simple. I want to know if that kind of longing still lives inside you, because sometimes remembering is the only way not to let die what was once pure. And it was by remembering him as a child that I realized the same love that once made me strong would one day be the love that made me bleed. It happened slowly. It didn't happen overnight, like thunder tearing the sky. It was a silence that began to grow inside the house, a silence that spread through the rooms like a shadow nobody invites but refuses to leave. I started to notice the changes in small things, the way he looked at me, the way he answered, the time he spent locked in his room. Before, he told me everything, even the simplest things. Mom, I got a good grade today. Mom, I fought with a friend. Mom, I dreamed about Dad. Those were the conversations that gave my day meaning. But suddenly, the mom got shorter, more distant, until it disappeared completely on some days. At first, I thought it was just adolescence, the time in life when kids think they know more than the whole world. I told myself it was a phase, that it would pass. But what started as a phase turned into distance, a distance you don't measure in feet, but in silences. He started going out more, coming home late, and when he arrived, he seemed tired, not physically, but inside. The eyes that once shone were now heavy, as if carrying something I couldn't grasp. And I, who had always known how to read his gestures, suddenly didn't understand anything anymore. Sometimes I tried to start a conversation, asked how his day had been, but the answers were short, dry, almost mechanical. I'm fine, Mom. Nothing much. I'll tell you later. And that later never came. I stood there, still, trying to find my little boy inside the man I no longer recognized. The same boy who used to curl up next to me when he had nightmares now avoided even looking me in the eyes. And I didn't know what hurt more, his silence or the certainty that little by little I was losing my son without understanding why. His smell changed, his room changed, his clothes changed. Even the way he walked through the house seemed different. Before, he would come in singing, slamming doors, asking for food, hugging me from behind. Now he slipped by quickly, almost without making a sound, as if he didn't want to be noticed. I remember one night when I made his favorite meal. I waited for him to get home and set the hot plate on the table. When he walked in, he just looked and said, "I'm not hungry," and went to his room. I stood there staring at the plate, the steam rising, the food getting cold. It felt like a metaphor for our relationship. The love was still there, but nobody wanted to sit and share it anymore. I began to notice he even avoided touch. If I tried to hug him, he pulled away. If I ran my hand through his hair, he recoiled. And the worst part was that there were no fights, no clear reason, no big argument to justify the coldness. It was just distance, a distance with no explanation, the kind that hurts more than any words spoken in anger. And I asked myself in silence, what did I do? Where did I go wrong? But his silence didn't answer. I prayed every night. I asked God to give me wisdom, to show me the way back to his heart, because a mother's heart knows when something is wrong, even when the whole world thinks everything's fine. And my heart was screaming, even when my mouth stayed quiet. Sometimes I heard the door slam late at night, and fear would take me over. Fear of not knowing where he was, fear the world would swallow him up, fear he would drift so far that I could never reach him again. I started noticing marks in his eyes. They weren't the dark circles of tiredness. They were the emptiness of someone carrying something heavy. I tried to talk, tried to get close, but he always said, "Leave it, Mom. I'm fine." Only he wasn't. No child who shuts their heart to their mother is fine. No child who avoids your gaze is fine. I knew it, but he wouldn't let me help. And the worst pain for a mother is this, watching your child drown and not being able to reach out because he doesn't want to be saved. Some days were worse. He'd come home and the air in the house would change. I felt a different energy, a mix of anger, confusion, sadness. It was as if he were fighting something he couldn't name. And I stayed there, in silence, trying to love him from a distance, trying to be present without invading. Because a mother's love also knows how to wait, even when waiting hurts. I kept telling myself, don't say anything. He needs space. God will bring him back. And I waited. I waited, and I prayed. I prayed with faith, but with tears. I prayed saying his name softly, asking God to calm my boy's heart. to keep him from the wrong crowd, from impulsive choices, from the kind of pain he didn't yet know how to handle. There was a day when he looked at me in a way I'll never forget. It was quick, but that look went right through me. There was anger, there was fear, there was guilt, and I realized my son was getting lost. He wasn't turning his back on me, he was turning his back on himself. He was fighting something inside, and I didn't know how to reach him. I tried to talk about God, tried to remind him of the prayers from his childhood, of the times he asked me to pray when he was scared. But he only said, "That doesn't fix anything, Mom." And he turned his back. That broke me inside. The house felt different. The TV seemed louder, the clock slower, the air heavier. I spent my days trying to pretend things were normal, tidying his things, washing his clothes, leaving little notes with Bible verses in his drawers. I wrote, "Love covers a multitude of sins," or, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." I thought maybe one of those words would, reach his heart, but the notes disappeared and he never said a word. I didn't know if he read them, threw them away, or pretended not to see. And that not knowing is what consumed me the most. People on the street looked at me and said, "Your son must be studying a lot, right? We hardly see him." And I smiled. I smiled so I wouldn't have to explain. I smiled to hide. I smiled to keep alive the image of a son who maybe only existed in my memories now. Inside the house, the space between us grew, and the silence was so loud I could hear my own thoughts breaking. I prayed and asked God if I had failed. I gave so much love, so much care, so much faith. What more could I have done? But a mother doesn't give up. Even without understanding, I kept believing that behind that coldness, my little boy still existed. The same one who hugged me when he was scared, the same one who laughed loud when I told stories, the same one who once promised he'd never leave me. I believed he was still there, lost somewhere inside himself. And that faith, this stubbornness of a mother, is what kept me standing. His changes were small at first, but each one was like a crack forming in my heart. One night without a goodnight kiss, a week without a real conversation, a month without hearing "I love you." Tiny absences that slowly became abysses. And still, I carried on. I made the coffee, cooked the meals, kept his room clean, because that's what a mother's love is, caring even when no one sees, loving even when that love isn't returned. Maybe you listening to me right now know what I'm talking about. Maybe you felt that same distance from someone you love, that silent pain of watching them drift away and not being able to stop it. Write in the comments if you've been through this too. If you felt that emptiness. I want to know where this silence comes from what corner of the world you're hearing me now. Because this story, this pain, this struggle to love even when the other person keeps running away, it's not just mine. It's the story of many mothers, many families, many hearts trying to find their way back home. And as time passed, my son stayed distant. But love, that never left. It just waited, quietly, like I did. Because a mother's love doesn't scream, it prays. And every prayer was a seed cast into the desert, waiting for the day my boy would bloom again. It all started with words so sharp they cut from the inside out. No one wakes up one morning and decides to hurt the person they love. These things build slowly, formed in silence, in absence, in unspoken pain. And I could feel it coming. I felt the weight of something about to break over us. My son no longer spoke to me the same way. His voice had changed. The tone that once carried respect and warmth was now cold, hard, almost like that of a stranger. I remember one afternoon, one of those ordinary ones, with sunlight pouring through the window and the smell of fresh coffee filling the house. I called him to eat, and he answered from far away, his voice impatient. I said, "I don't want any, Mom." Those words, short, harsh, hit me like a blow. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. It hurt more than I could admit. Still, I took a deep breath. I told myself that patience and prayer would bring things back to how they were. But time turned our home into a minefield. Every conversation felt dangerous. I spoke carefully, measuring every word, afraid of saying the wrong thing. And still, everything I said seemed wrong. If I asked something, he got irritated. If I stayed quiet, he complained. Nothing I did could reach his heart. Some nights I lay awake, praying for God to show me what to do. Lord, I don't want to lose my son. I just want him to be the boy he used to be. But the arguments started becoming routine. Small things turned into storms. A towel out of place, a late bill, advice given at the wrong time. Anything could set him off. And what hurt most wasn't how loud he yelled, but the poison inside his words. He started saying things I never imagined I'd hear from my boy's mouth. You don't understand anything. You suffocate me. I'm tired of you. Every sentence felt like it tore another piece out of me. One day he came home visibly angry. I felt it immediately. Something was wrong. His steps were heavy, his breathing short, his eyes unfocused. I tried to stay calm, offered him a glass of water, asked if everything was all right, and he exploded. Stop pretending you care. Those words echoed inside me. I stood still, fighting the tears, but he went on. He said I never let him live, that I always tried to control everything, that I was the reason his life was a mess. I listened in silence, holding back the sob in my throat, asking God for strength not to strike back. His words hit me like stones. You're a burden. You ruin everything you touch. I wish you'd just disappear. Each phrase was a fresh wound. And the worst part was, even with my heart breaking, I couldn't feel anger, only pain, because I knew it wasn't really him talking. It was the chaos inside him, the anger, the frustration, the world outside shaping the boy I had raised. I tried to stop the argument. I told him to calm down, that we could talk later, but he didn't want to listen. He screamed so much it was like he needed to release years of hurt, and I, in silence, let him. I let him because sometimes love has to be the wall the other person collapses against. I let him because my mother's heart still believed that after the storm, peace would come. But words don't disappear after they're spoken. They echo. They linger between what was and what still hurts. After that day, something changed for good. I remember going to my room and falling to my knees, not to cry, but to pray. Because tears wash the eyes, but prayer cleans the soul. I asked God to calm his heart, to heal the wounds I couldn't see. I asked him to teach me how to love in the middle of chaos. The days that followed were heavy. Every word between us felt like walking on glass. I spoke less, afraid of saying something that might set him off. And he, more and more withdrawn, more distant each day. The boy who once called me my best friend now seemed to want to erase me from his life. One night, I heard the front door slam hard. He had come home late. I went to the living room, just to check if he was okay. And that's when the worst happened. He looked at me as if I were in his way, not the mother who raised him. His eyes were different, cold, sharp. I said, "Son, you can't keep living like this." And he screamed. He screamed with such rage that the sound made me tremble. "You're the problem." At that moment, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. It wasn't just a scream. It was a wound being torn open. And I realized the love that once united us was now buried under pain I didn't know how to heal. He turned his back and went to his room, leaving his words echoing in the air. I stood there, frozen, my heart tight in my chest, my mind desperate to make sense of it. I could have yelled back. I could have defended myself. But what does a mother gain from that? Nothing. Love doesn't defend itself by shouting. It defends itself with patience. And that's what I tried to do. Even hurt, I chose silence. The kind of silence that prays, that forgives, that waits for her son to find his way back to himself. But that silence hid more than faith. It hid fear of what was coming. Because in his eyes that night, there was something different. Something that told me the worst hadn't happened yet. From that day on, every word felt dangerous. I started walking on tiptoe in my own home. The fear of another fight, the worry that anything I said might set him off, consumed me. And still, I kept trying. I taped Bible verses to the mirror, left quiet messages around the house. One day I wrote on a piece of paper, "Nothing can erase the love between a mother and her son." I left it on his pillow. He saw it, picked it up, looked at me, and tore it apart. I swallowed my tears. From that moment on, I knew the wound had gone deeper. He was broken inside and using me as his target. Love had become a mirror, and everything he hated in himself, he saw in me. And even knowing that, the pain was unbearable. Every word spoken during that time was a blow that left scars. There was no blood, but my heart was bleeding. I barely slept. I spent the nights awake, praying for God to protect my son, to keep the darkness I felt closing in away from him. I whispered, "Lord, don't let this pain turn into destruction." If you understand the weight of these words, write it in the comments. I've been through this too, because this pain, the pain of watching love turn into silence, of hearing cruelty from the lips of the one you gave life to, isn't just any pain. It's the kind of pain only a mother's heart can understand. And so, between shouting and prayer, between love that insists and fear that silences, I realized his words had already cut deeper than any slap ever could. But I still didn't know that the worst was yet to come. The night felt heavier. It was as if the air were dense, still, charged with something I couldn't explain. I felt in my heart that something bad was about to happen, and a mother feels it, always feels it. He came home late, and the sound of the key in the door thundered through my soul. When he walked in, the look in his eyes wasn't my son's. It was the look of someone overtaken by anger, by pain, maybe by something the world outside had poured into him. I tried to breathe and approach him calmly, like I always did. I said, "Son, I was worried. Where were you?" But he didn't answer. He walked straight past me, bumped into the table, and dropped his keys. I called him again. "My son, talk to me." Then he turned. His eyes were wet, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were fury. I had never seen that look before. And before I could say another word, he started screaming. "You ruined everything! Everything I am is your fault!" His voice echoed through the house, and for a moment I didn't even recognize the sound. It was a voice heavy with hate, but also with pain. He said things that made no sense, mixed his words, cried and shouted all at once. I tried to calm him, saying, "Son, please, breathe. I love you." But the more I said, I loved him, the angrier he became. What happened next, I've never been able to forget. He came closer, hands flying, face flushed, body shaking. I took a step back, not out of fear, but because I didn't understand what was happening. When he shouted, "Shut up," it was so loud I closed my eyes for a second. And in that second, I felt the impact. A dry sound, a crack that didn't echo just in the air. It echoed inside me. His hand landed hard on my face, and for a moment, time stopped. The silence that followed was the cruelest of all. I didn't feel physical pain right away. I felt heat rush through me, a wave of dizziness, and then the cold of a soul splitting in two. He stepped back, as if he too was startled by what he'd done, and I stood there, frozen, my face burning and my heart completely shattered. I looked at him. Not with anger, not with hate. I looked like a mother searching for the little boy inside the man who for an instant seemed to vanish. I saw my son, but I didn't recognize him. His gaze wavered. He put a hand to his head, paced back and forth, saying, I didn't mean to, and I stayed quiet, because there were no words that belonged in that moment. Nothing could describe what I felt. The body ached later, but what truly tore was my heart, my mother's heart, the one that had dreamed, that had prayed, that had believed. I raised my hand to my face, and the skin still hot reminded me it was real. I wasn't dreaming. My son had hit me. The little boy I carried in my arms, who slept against my chest, who cried when he fell down, had raised his hand against me. It's the kind of pain you don't feel in your body. You feel it in your soul. The soul screams, but no sound comes out. He looked at me for a few seconds, not knowing what to do, and then he left. The door slammed, and the silence ruled again. But now it was a different silence, the silence of a house that had watched love turn into pain. I sat on the floor, my legs shaking, my heart racing, and I cried. I cried like I had never cried before, not because of the slap, but because of what it meant, because that gesture wasn't just physical aggression, it was the symbol of everything we had lost. I didn't scream, I didn't curse him, I didn't call anyone, I just cried and prayed, God protect him, even from himself, because in the middle of all that pain, love was still there, wounded but alive, hurt but whole. and I knew that if hate took the place of love, then everything truly would be lost. I stayed there, hands clasped, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. Memories began to play like a movie. His first day of school, his first baby tooth, the first, "I love you, Mom," and now, this. It was impossible to understand how love can become pain so quickly. But maybe, I thought, true love doesn't disappear. It endures, and that's what I chose to do. Endure. My face burned, but what burned most was inside. I thought about calling someone, asking for help, but I couldn't. I could only think of him, where he was, what he felt, whether he was sorry or if pride still blinded him. Because a mother's love is like that. It bleeds, but keeps loving. It gets struck, but keeps praying. It suffers, and still believes her son will come back. Hours passed, and I stayed there, on the cold floor, my heart hot with pain. Each tear that felt like a cry for help sent up to heaven. And in the middle of the crying, I whispered, "Lord, I know my son is lost, but your love reaches where I can't." In that prayer, I found the strength to stand. In the mirror, I saw the mark on my face. On the outside, it looked small, but inside it cut too deep. And still, I looked at myself and said, "You will not let hate win." Because hate is the last blow evil tries to land when love is still standing. And my love for him was still standing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door, waiting to hear the key turn, waiting for him to come back. But he didn't. And for the first time, the house felt empty in a way that even silence couldn't fill. I know those listening to me now can feel the weight of this, the pain of being hurt by the one you love most, the pain of looking at someone and knowing the love hasn't vanished, just been buried under layers of hurt, confusion, and regret. If you've lived something like this, write in the comments, "I understand this pain," because simply recognizing pain is the first step toward healing it. My story doesn't end here. There was still so much to live, to feel, to forgive. But in that moment, what remained was silence. The same silence that lives between a wound and the beginning of its healing. A heavy silence, full of faith and tears. And if you're hearing my story now, I want to ask you for something important. Don't leave this video without subscribing to the channel. Because here, every story is a wound that finds healing. Every pain you feel, I turn into words. Every tear that falls finds an echo here. This channel isn't about sadness. It's about overcoming, about faith, and the power of a heart that does not give up. So if you also believe that love and forgiveness can transform even the deepest hurts, subscribe now. Don't put it off, because the next video might be the one that heals a part of your soul you didn't even know still hurt. The floor was cold, cold like the silence that filled the house after he left. I was still there, sitting, my hands trembling and my heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. The clock was close to midnight, but time felt frozen. The sound of the wind outside was the only thing reminding me the world was still turning, even when mine felt like it had fallen apart. I looked up at the ceiling and tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't come. It was as if something were squeezing my chest, a pain no one could see, but one that burned from the inside. And there, in the middle of that emptiness, I closed my eyes and called on God. "Lord, help me." The words came out soft, shaky, like a whisper my own voice barely believed. I didn't ask for revenge. I didn't ask for punishment. I asked for protection. I asked for protection. Protect him, even from himself, because my heart knew that what had happened wasn't just an act of anger. It was a cry from someone who was lost, fighting against something I couldn't. See, the prayer started in silence, but over time it turned into tears. Tears that came from the soul. Heavy tears that carried fear, pain, and love all at once. They fell onto the cold floor, and each one felt like a seed of faith, a seed of hope. I felt as though God was there, even without words, listening in silence, drying the tears I couldn't stop. I thought about how many times that same floor had seen happy moments, how many times he and I had laughed there sitting together, eating, talking about life. Now, that same floor was holding me in pieces, and still, I felt it was the only place I could be, on my knees, because when the world knocks you down, it's on your knees that you find the strength to rise again. I started remembering the nights when he was little, and I prayed beside his bed. He'd sleep with his tiny hand on the pillow, and I'd run my fingers through his hair, whispering, "God, watch over my boy." I never stopped saying that prayer, even after he grew up. But that night, it carried a different weight. I wasn't asking God to protect him from the world anymore. I was asking him to protect him from himself, from his anger, from his pride, from his guilt, from everything that was consuming his soul. The clock kept ticking, and I stayed there, motionless. I didn't want to sleep, because closing my eyes meant reliving that moment. The sound of the slap, his eyes, the silence that followed. It all replayed in my head like a film I couldn't stop. But between one memory and another, faith found its way in. A soft voice whispered inside me saying, "Forgive, my daughter. Don't let evil win over love." And I knew that was God speaking. The house felt empty, but I sensed a presence. It was as if my pain itself had turned into a prayer. And the more I prayed, the lighter my chest began to feel. The tears kept falling, but they were no longer desperate. They were tears of surrender. I said, "Lord, I don't understand your plans, but I trust you. If this pain has a purpose, teach me to endure it. If this wound must exist, teach me to heal it." I knew that many people in my place would have rebelled, screamed, cursed, shut down their hearts, but I couldn't. Because a mother's love doesn't know how to hate. A mother's love only knows how to pray. Even when broken, even when betrayed, even when in pieces, it prays. And that prayer is what kept me alive that night. As the hours passed, I began to feel something different. It was as though the presence of God wrapped around me, a gentle warmth, not of the body, but of the soul. I felt peace for the first time in a long time, not a peace that erased the pain, but one that whispered, "You will make it." I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I was able to say out loud, "I forgive." The words came out slowly, with effort, but when they did, it was like a chain breaking. My body felt lighter, my heart tired, but calm. And I realized that forgiveness wasn't about him. It was about me. It was about not letting anger take the place of love, not letting pain become a prison. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew that as long as I had faith, I would have the strength to go on. I stayed there until dawn, watching the sunlight slowly fill the room. Each ray felt like a sign, as if God were saying, "You survived the night. Now begin again." I stood up slowly, still weak, but with a steady heart. I looked in the mirror and saw my face marked, my eyes swollen, and I thought, here stands a woman who's been hurt, but she's alive, and where there is life, there is purpose. I picked up the Bible that was on the table, opened it at random, and my eyes fell on a verse. "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." I smiled through my tears, because it felt like that verse had been written for me, for that night, for that moment. As I read, I felt an overwhelming urge to share that message, to tell others that even in our deepest pain, God still speaks, He still listens, He still answers, because God's silence isn't absence, it's preparation. And in that silence, He was rebuilding me. I looked around and saw that my home was still the same, but I wasn't. I had been broken, but something inside me was being reshaped. Faith, strength, forgiveness, all blending into a new hope being born. And if you're hearing me right now, maybe you know exactly what this feels like. Maybe you too are on your knees, asking God to heal a pain no one else understands. So let me tell you this, don't give up, hold on. The same God who held me that cold night is the same one who will lift you when your world feels like it's falling apart. Write this in the comments. I believe. Write it as a declaration of faith, not for me, but for yourself. Because when you write, "I believe," your heart remembers what pain tries to make you forget. And I stayed there, praying, until my body grew tired and my heart grew calm. Prayer became my shelter. The cold floor became my altar, and silence became the voice of God speaking to me. And without realizing it, it was in that night of tears that I began to understand. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's rebirth. But forgiveness is a long road, and I was only taking the first step. The day was breaking outside, and life was calling me to go on. I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and promised myself that no matter how hard it was, I would not let pain turn me into someone I never wanted to be, because those who have faith, even when wounded, always find their way back to the light. When the sun rose that morning, the house felt like a body without a soul. The open windows let the wind in, but nothing moved. The silence had a weight that only those who have lived through loss can understand. He had left the night before, without saying where, without looking back, and I stood there, still, my heart in pieces, staring at the door that still swayed slightly, as if whispering, "It's over." His bag was still on the floor, half full, half empty, as if even he didn't know whether he wanted to go or stay. But he left, and that sound of the door closing was the cruelest sound I've ever heard in my life. In the days that followed, the house turned into a desert. I tried to keep up with routine, but everything screamed his name. His favorite dish in the kitchen, the chair he always sat in, the clothes that still smelled of cheap cologne and youth. Sometimes I found myself calling his name without realizing it. "Son?" But only the echo answered, giving back an empty sound. Every corner of that house held a memory. Every memory was an open wound. I didn't cry much in those first days. My body was too tired to cry. It was as if I had spent all my tears that night. But my heart didn't stop. I walked around the house talking to God all the time. I didn't ask for my son to come back. I asked for him to survive. "Lord, wherever my son is, don't let him fall. Stay with him. Save him from shame, from the kind of regret that destroys." Because I knew guilt always comes. Sooner or later, it always comes. And its weight is far too heavy to carry alone. The neighbors started asking questions. "Did your son travel? Haven't seen him in a while." And I smiled. The same smile of someone bleeding inside, but pretending to be strong. I said, "He went to take care of some things no one needed to know." A mother's pain isn't something to show. It's something she guards. I didn't want anyone looking at him with judgment, because even after everything he'd done, he was still my boy. At night, his room became both my refuge and my torment. I would sit on his bed, hug his pillow, and pray. My prayers no longer had pretty words. They were simple, short, honest. God, take care of him. Sometimes that was all. Because when the soul is exhausted, even praying hurts. But I knew that even my silence, God understood. The days dragged on. 1, 2, 3, and nothing. No calls, no messages. I'd look at my phone as if waiting for a miracle. The sound of any notification made my heart race, and nothing. Emptiness is cruel, but hope is stubborn. I kept telling myself, "He'll call." And every night I repeated the same prayer before bed. A week passed before a neighbor said she had seen him on the street, alone, with a lost look. My heart raced, but fear came too. Fear that he was ashamed to come back, ashamed to look at me and see what he'd done. Because guilt does that. It turns love into distance, and sometimes pride is the tallest wall a son builds between himself and his mother's arms. But love is stubborn. It waits. It forgives before it's even asked to. And that's what I did. I waited, not waiting for an apology, but believing that love is a road that always leads home. I knew he would come one day. I didn't know when or how, but I could feel it, because mothers feel it. Still, time went on, and he didn't return. The nights grew longer. I would sit at the table and stare at the empty chair. The food got cold. The candle burned to the end, and the silence turned into prayer. I spoke to God like you talk to a friend. I said, "Lord, if I can't hold him, then hold him for me." And I truly believed that somewhere, at that exact moment, God was placing his hand over my son's head and saying, "I'm here." One day the phone rang. My heart raced. My hands trembled. I answered quickly, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. It was someone I knew, saying he'd seen my son in another neighborhood, wandering aimlessly. He was alive, and that was enough to make me thank God. I hung up the phone and cried, but this time, not from pain. I cried from relief. It was the sign I needed to keep praying. Every sleepless night became an offering. I spoke his name like someone gripping a rope, refusing to let go. "God, my son is still yours. No matter what he's done, he's still yours." and the more I said it, the more peace returned to my heart. That's how faith works. It doesn't change what happened, but it changes how we carry it. With time, I started seeing God's signs. A dream here, a verse there, a word that found me by surprise. Everything told me not to give up, and I didn't. I wrote his name on a piece of paper and placed it inside my Bible. Every day I opened to the same verse. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And I read it out loud, like sealing a promise. People told me I should let go, that I needed to take care of myself, and I did. But taking care of myself also meant taking care of him, even from afar. Because when you're a mother, loving your child is part of loving yourself. The forgiveness I chose wasn't an act. It became a way of living. I decided I wouldn't let his mistake turn me into someone bitter, because pain, when left unhealed, turns into poison, and I wanted to be healing, not a wound. One night, out of nowhere, the phone rang again. It was late. When I answered, all I could hear was crying. It was him, his voice trembling, broken pauses between words. Mom, that was all he managed to say, and that was all I needed to hear. That single mom carried everything. Regret, longing, forgiveness, asking to be accepted. I took a deep breath and said softly, "It's okay, my son. Come home." The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. That night, I felt my heart beating. Again, it was as if God himself whispered, "See, love didn't fail." And I cried. I cried for everything we had lived through and everything we still had to live. The pain was still there, but it finally had a name. A new beginning. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it opens the path to the future. And my future, though uncertain, now had hope. I knew his road would still be long, that pride would still hurt, that guilt would still come back. But I also knew that a mother's love is the one thing time can't destroy. And if you're hearing this right now and your heart feels tight, write in the comments, "Love always wins." Because that phrase isn't just comfort, it's truth. Love wins over pain, over pride, over time, and even over distance. Time began to move differently after that phone call. My prayers continued, but now they were filled more with gratitude than desperation. I no longer asked God to bring him back. I asked God to guide him. Because sometimes love means letting go so the other person can find their way home. And in that waiting that became my greatest lesson, I learned something profound. Guilt isn't punishment, it's a tool. God uses guilt to make our hearts understand the weight of our choices. And when we surrender everything into his hands, even what seemed lost finds meaning again. So if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, this is your moment to do it. Here, every story is a lesson in faith, forgiveness, and rebirth. Here, you'll understand that no pain is meaningless and that God always turns wounds into strength. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay with me, because what's coming next will touch your soul in ways you've never felt before. And write in the comments, "I don't give up on faith," because saying those words from the heart might just be the first miracle of your life today. Time moved slowly, as if each day were a test of patience, faith, and love. The weeks dragged on. The pages of the calendar turned, but the emptiness stayed right where it was. I kept praying, like someone lighting a candle in the dark. And even without news, even without knowing where he was, something inside me told me that God was still working. I felt that at some moment, life would place us face to face again. And when that happened, it wouldn't be to relive the pain, but to heal it. It happened on an ordinary morning, one that didn't warn me something big was about to happen. I was doing laundry when I heard the gate creak open slowly. The sound of metal scraping against the ground echoed in my chest, and for a second, I froze. My heart started pounding, as if it recognized a calling. Time slowed down. Every step that came closer to the door was a mix of fear and hope. When the doorknob turned, I knew. I didn't have to see his face to know who it was. He walked in slowly, his shoulders hunched, his eyes down, his face tired. The anger I'd seen the last time was gone, and so was the pride that had driven him away. What filled the room now was silence, a heavy silence, full of regret. He was thinner, his hair messy, his beard uneven, But it wasn't his appearance that struck me. It was his eyes. The same eyes that once hurt me now begged for forgiveness without a single word. For a moment, time stood still. I looked at him and saw the boy I had raised, the baby who slept in my arms, the stubborn teenager, the lost man. All of them were standing before me, asking for shelter. No words could describe what I felt. Pain, relief, love, all of it mixing in one silent storm. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Mom. Just that. One word. But it was enough. It sounded different this time. Weak, trembling, remorseful. I felt the tears coming and couldn't hold them back. He dropped to his knees, his hands shaking. Forgive me. The words came out in fragments, almost without strength, as if each syllable weighed 1,000 pounds. I took one step forward. Just one. And in that single step, all the pain, all the shouting, all the silence dissolved. Forgiveness didn't come from my lips. It came from my heart. I held him. A long, tight embrace that seemed to piece back together all the broken parts of who we were and who we could still become. He cried like a child, and I cried too. It was a pure kind of crying, the kind that washes the soul clean. Neither of us needed to say another word. Forgiveness doesn't need speeches. It happens in the moment when love speaks, louder than pain. And in that moment, love spoke. I felt his heart beating against mine, fast, uneven, and I thought, here he is, my son, lost but alive, hurt but home. We stayed like that for a time I couldn't measure. The world outside kept moving, but inside that house, time had stopped. When he finally stepped back, still with tears running down his face, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in so long. Peace, a fragile peace, shy and trembling, but real. He told me everything. How he'd been wandering, trying to find himself, how he'd slept in cold places, how he'd thought about giving up. He said each night away from home weighed heavier than the one before. That guilt ate at him, that the memory of the slap replayed in his head, that even when he tried to silence it, he could still hear the echo of my prayer. Mom, he said, I could feel it, like you were still praying for me. I smiled, because I never stopped. A mother's prayers are like that. They travel through time, across streets, across distance. They reach wherever the child is, even when he doesn't want to listen. And that's what brought him back. Not fear, not force, not guilt. Faith, the kind of faith that doesn't demand explanations, that doesn't ask for reasons. The kind of faith that simply says, I waited for you. He cried, and I let him cry. Sometimes repentance doesn't need words, just tears, and I knew those tears were real. I could see the little boy inside him again, asking to be loved, to be accepted, to be forgiven. And I welcomed him, without hesitation, because a mother's love doesn't hold grudges, it holds hope. After a while he asked, Do you really forgive me, Mom? And I said, My son, forgiveness existed long before you ever asked for it. He looked at me, surprised, and I went on, because a mother's love doesn't wait for repentance to forgive. It forgives because it loves, and it loves because that's what it was created to do. The day moved slowly. He stayed there with me, sitting at the table, eating in silence. The same silence that once divided us now held us together. The clinking of silverware, the smell of food, the sound of his footsteps in the house, everything felt different. It was as if life had found its way back into those walls. As he ate, I watched him. Every gesture, every look. I wanted to memorize that moment because I knew it was the beginning of something new. And every new beginning is a miracle. He looked at me and said, I don't deserve your love. I smiled again and replied, Neither do I deserve God's love. And yet, he still loves me. Faith, once again, held everything together. I realized forgiveness is a divine act. When we forgive, we get closer to God in a way no prayer ever could. And that day, I felt God's presence right there in our living room. There was no glowing light, no voice from heaven, just peace, simple and profound peace. Forgiveness changed the air, the eyes, the energy. The weight of the past lifted from my chest, and in its place there was something light, something alive. Love had won. Not the kind of love that's perfect or easy, but the kind that chooses to keep going, even when it hurts. He stayed the night at home, sleeping in his old room. Before lying down, he hugged me and said, "Mom, I promise I'll never hurt you again." I didn't answer. I just brushed his face gently and said, "Promise God. He's the one who'll give you the strength to keep that promise." That night, I stayed awake for a while, watching his door. The sound of his breathing was the most beautiful sound in the world, proof that even after the storm, love still blooms. The following days were about rebuilding. Our days were quiet but peaceful. There was respect. There was care. I saw him trying, really trying, to be better. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he fell silent again, but he was trying. And for a mother, that's enough. I began to see how God works in his own time. What seemed lost was being restored. What felt impossible was unfolding right before my eyes. I learned that forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. The same pain that once destroyed me was now teaching me. And so we went on. He helped me around the house, and every time our eyes met, I saw a silent apology there, and I answered with a smile. Because true forgiveness doesn't need words anymore. It becomes presence. A mother's love is like a river. It can be blocked, diverted, polluted, but it never dries up. It always finds a way to keep flowing. And it was that love that healed what once felt unhealable. If you're listening to this right now and believe there's still time to forgive, to start again, to make peace with someone who hurt you, write this in the comments. I choose forgiveness, because that choice changes destinies, heals hearts, and makes the impossible happen. And our new beginning, mine and his, was just that, a beginning, a story no longer written with words, but with faith, with tears, and with the purest kind of love there is, the kind that forgives, even when it still hurts. The world moves so fast, so full of noise, that it sometimes forgets the power hidden in silence. I've learned, through a wounded soul and a heart in pieces, that forgiveness is the most discreet miracle God performs in our lives. It doesn't come with thunder, with applause, or with easy promises. Forgiveness comes softly, in the middle of pain, and whispers, "Now, you can breathe." To forgive isn't to forget. It's to remember without bleeding. It's to look at the past without feeling its weight pulling you backward anymore. It's freeing the other person, but even more, it's freeing yourself. It took me time to understand that. I had to kneel, cry, stay silent, talk to God, and most importantly, listen to myself. Because sometimes the voice we need to hear the most is the one that comes from within, the one that says, "You're still capable of love." How? Many people spend their whole lives chained by resentment, not realizing that forgiveness is the key. How many sleepless nights, broken dreams, and silent prayers come from a heart that never handed its pain over to God? I spent years trapped by memories that tore me apart in silence. But the day I chose to forgive, the whole world seemed to breathe with me. It was like opening the windows after a long storm. Forgiveness isn't weakness. The world may say it is. It might laugh, judge, point fingers, call it foolish. But only those who forgive know how much it hurts and how much it heals. It's a war fought inside the soul, between pride and love, between justice and grace. And when you choose grace, something divine happens. Your heart starts beating again to the rhythm of peace. Today, when I look back, I don't see the woman who cried in pain. I see a woman who survived, who stood up again, who turned her wound into testimony. Because God never wastes pain. He uses every tear, every fall, every silence to shape us. And when He's done, the wound becomes a scar. And a scar is proof that the pain is gone, but the lesson remains. There were so many times I thought my story had ended that day, with the slap, the goodbye, the broken heart. But God showed me that His endings are different from ours. He writes new beginnings where we only see ruins. He turns loss into learning, shame into strength. Forgiveness isn't the end. It's the beginning of a new life. And if you're hearing this right now, maybe your heart needs that same miracle. Maybe there's someone who hurt you, disappointed you, made you doubt love itself. I don't know who it is or what happened, but I do know this. If you hand that pain over to God, He will turn what once felt like a curse into purpose. He will give you peace where once there was only memory. Write this in the comments. I choose to forgive. Because forgiveness is a decision that changes destinies. It's like lighting a candle in the darkest corner of your soul. When you choose to forgive, you choose to live. While the world talks about revenge, about pride, about who's right, I've learned to value silence. The silence that prays, the silence that heals, the silence that listens to God's voice. Because it was in the silence of my longest nights that He taught me. To love is to endure, and to forgive is to be reborn. There is no greater victory than to keep loving when everything inside you begs to give up. And it was that love, the love of a mother, the divine love, the love that never dies, that carried me here. Now that this story ends, I want to tell you something. Every pain has a purpose, and every broken heart can still bloom. Sometimes God allows chaos just to reveal the miracle. And the miracle isn't that everything goes back to how it was. It's that after everything, you can still smile. Life is like that. It breaks you, teaches you, and then puts you back together. And when it does, you're never the same. You're stronger, you're wiser, you're whole. Forgiveness is the breath that brings life back to what hatred tried to kill. As this video comes to an end, take a deep breath. Think about who you need to release from your heart. Think about who you need to place in God's hands. And when you feel the moment arrive, just say, I forgive. Say it with your heart. Because forgiveness is between you and God, not between you and them. And before you go, I want to invite you to stay with me. The next video appearing on your screen will touch you deeply. It's a different story, not a continuation of this one, but it carries the same soul, the same essence, the same strength of the matriarch secrets. Another story of faith, renewal, and love. Click and watch. Let God speak to you again, in a new way, through another life, another pain, another miracle. Because sometimes, what your heart needs to finally heal is a story it didn't know it was waiting for. And remember this, as long as there is faith, as long as there is love, forgiveness will always be the unseen miracle, the one that transforms everything.